My name is Matrissa Gibson. Today I want to be measuring this ball mannequin head. The items I have in front of me is this washable marker and this measuring tape. So the first thing I'm going to do is mark my landmarks. I'm going to mark the nasion, which is here. My end, which is here. My right preauricular, which is here, and I'm going to mark my left preauricular, which is here. So next, what I'm going to do now, what I'm going to do is start at my nasion through past sagittal line all the way to my end, and the number I have is 32.5. So the first thing I'm going to do is find half of 32.5 and mark my CZ spot, which is my midline, and it should be 16.25. Okay. So next, what I'm going to do is pick up my measuring tape, go back to my nasion, line my measuring tape back up. So now what I do after finding the CZ midpoint, go back to my nasion and find my FPZ, which is ground. In order to find that, I have to take 10% of the number of 32.5, and 10% of that is 3.25. Okay. So, since I'm already at the FPZ mark, I'm going to go ahead and put the cross mark and make sure it lines up with the nasion. So now what I'm going to do, get my measuring tape, go on the line I just made, which is FPZ. And then from FPZ, I should find FZ, and it should be 20% of 3.25, and that should be 6.5. So I'm going to pick up my measuring tape and make sure the CZ is correct, and that also should be 6.5. So I'm going to pick my measuring tape, go to CZ, now I'm going to find PZ, and it should be 20% from CZ, and that also should be 6.5. Alright, so next I'm going to put my measuring tape on PZ, and 20% of the number, which is 3.25, should be 6.5. And next I'm going to mark OZ, and OZ should be 6.5. So after I find OZ, I pick my measuring tape up, put it on OZ, and have it covering my end. And when I go back to find the measurements for my end, it should be 10% of 3.25, and I have to make sure they're correct, and it should be 3.25. And it should look like this. So what I'm going to do now is start from the left preauricular, go through my CZ line, to my right periauricular. And I should get 36. Half of 36 is 18. So what I'm going to do now is go to my CZ point and mark 18 on the midline. And once I do that, the CZ part should have a cross. And it should look like this. So now what I'm going to do with measuring tape still curve from periauricular to periauricular, go back to my left periauricular, and in order to find T3, it's going to be 10% of 36, and 10% of 36 is 3.6. So I'm going to mark 3.6. So I'm going to pick my measuring tape up, put it on the T3 line, and in order to find C3, it's going to be 20% of 3.6. And 20% of 3.6 is 7.2. So right now I'm marking 7.2 for C3. So next I'm going to pick up my measuring tape and check and see if my line is correct for CZ, and it is. So what I'm going to do is pick my measuring tape up, go to CZ, and I have to find 20% of 3.6, which is 7.2, in order to get C4, and it should be 7.2. So next I'm going to pick my measuring tape up, put it on C4, and right now it's still 20% in order to find T4, so T4 is going to also be 7.2. So after I get through with that, I'm going to take my measuring tape, put it on T4, and make sure my point is correct. And it should be 3.6. Alright. So next what I'm going to do is circumference. So what I'm going to do is take my measuring tape, put it on the line where FPZ is, take it through T3. Then after I take my measurement through T3, I'm going to go through OZ. Then after I go through OZ, I'm going through T4. And after I go through T4, I'm going back to FPZ. And it should be 57.9. So what I'm going to do now is get my measuring tape and find 5% of 5.79. And 5% of 5.79 is 2.8. So what I'm going to do now is have that part of the measuring tape I just folded in the middle where the nascent is, and I'm going to mark the beginning of my measuring tape, which is FP2, and then I'm going to mark the other side, which is 5% of FPZ ground, which is 5.79. And it should look like this. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and cross FP2, and I'm going to cross FP1. So next, what I'm going to do is start on my left from FP1, put my measuring tape on the line, go through T3, and when I go through T3, in order to find F7, I'm going to mark 5.79, which is 10% from FP1. So I'm going to put my line, and while the measuring tape is still up, I'm going to go ahead and mark my cross through T3, and that should be 11.58. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that. So next, what I'm going to do, pick my measuring tape up and go to T3, take my measuring tape through OZ, and once I take my measuring tape through OZ, I'm going to mark 5.79, which is 10% in order to get T5. And it should look like this. So what I'm going to do now is get my measuring tape and find 5% of 5.79. And 5% of 5.79 is 2.8. So what I'm going to do now is next what I'm going to do is pick up my measuring tape it should look like that. So I'm picking my measuring tape back up, putting my line back on my measuring tape, beginning of it on T3, going through the mark I just made, which is T5, and going to OZ. So next I'm going to mark 11.58 to get 01. So next what I'm going to do is get my measuring tape, and go back to T3, take my line through the mark I just made, which is T5. Then I'm going to go through T5 and go straight to OZ. So I already marked 5.7, so in order to find 01, I'm just going to add those two numbers together, and I'm going to mark 11.58. And the numbers I added together was 5.79. So now what I'm going to do, go to my right side, put the beginning of my measuring tape on FP2. Then I'm going to go through T4, hold my measuring tape. So I'm going to find F8. So what I'm going to do for F8 is use 10% of 5.79. So while my measuring tape is already being held, I'm going to go ahead and mark T4, and it's going to be 11.58. All right. So next, what I'm going to do is put my measuring tape on T4 and go through OZ. So what I'm going to do now is find 5.79 to mark T6. So I'm going to put mark 5.79. Which is T6. So I'm going to take my marker and since I'm already through OZ, I'm going to go ahead and mark 11.58. I'm going to go ahead and put my line through O2 and line it up with OZ. So what I'm going to do now is go back with my measuring tape. I'm starting on the left side. Put my measuring tape on FP1. Go back to where I made the line for F7. And I'm going to cross my marks with the measuring tape. Just make sure they're equal all the way around. So I'm going to get my measuring tape, go to T3. And I'm going to go ahead and make my line for T5. So now I'm going to go to the other side. Start with FP2 and do the same thing I did to the other side. Go through and put my cross marks and have all my marks lined up. Put my measuring tape up, go to T3. Take my measuring tape through that and mark my lines. Alright, so what I'm about to do now is go to F7, take my measuring tape through F3, and go back through F8. And I should get so now what I'm going to do is get my measuring tape, start at the cross where F7 is, F7, go through F3, then go through F8, and I should get 21.5. So the midpoint of F3 should be 10.75. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and mark that. So while my measuring tape is still here, I'm going to mark the beginning part. So the front part should look like this. So next what I'm going to do, go back to the left, start at T5, go through PZ, and then I'm taking my measuring tape all the way to T6, And I should have 23.5. Alright. So what I'm going to do now is get my measuring tape, go through F7, take my measuring tape through FZ, then I'm going to go to F8, and I got 21.5. So since I got 21.5, half of 21.5 is 10.75, so I'm going to go ahead and mark that. Okay, so since I have my measuring tape still here, I'm going to go to the beginning so I can find F3. Uh-oh. Make sure my measuring tape right. So what I'm going to mark now is 5.3. So still having my measuring tape, I'm going to put it back on how it was first time through the different marks. So my last number to find is F4, and that number should be 16.5. Okay, I'm going to mark that. So next what I'm going to do is go back to the left, start at T5, take my measuring tape through PZ and go all the way to T6. And the number I have is 23. And half of 23 is 11.5. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that mark. So while my measuring tape is still in place, I'm going to go back to the beginning to find P3. And P3 should be 5.75. So after I find that, while my measuring tape is still in place, I'm going to find the last mark, and it should be 17.2. So that should look like this. So what I'm going to do now is take my measuring tape, go to the begin. I'm going to my left again. I'm starting at FP1. So what I'm going to do is take my measuring tape through F3, C3, P3, all the way to O1. And I should have 24. So half of 24 is 12. And I'm going to go ahead and put a cross between C3. So when I go back to the front, I'll just mark 6. And then when I go back, well, the front, I just mark that 6 is F3. So now I'm going to go back to P3 and half of 12, well, not half of 12. So now I'm going to add 6 to that 12, and I should get 18. So next I'm going to go to the right. Start at FP2. Go through F4, C4, P4, and O2. So I have 22. So what I'm going to do is keep my measuring tape in the spot. So I can go back and mark half of 22, which is 11. And then what I would do is go up to, so what I'm going to do now is go back to the front of FP2. I'm going to go through F4, C4, P4, and O2. The number I have is 22. So I'm going to leave my measuring tape here. I'm going to go to my midpoint, which is C3, and mark 11. So after I mark 11, I'll go to the front and mark F4, and that should be 5.5. So I'm going to leave my measuring tape the way it is, and I'm going to go through to find the cross mark for P4, and that should be 16.5. So I'm going to go ahead and make my mark right here. So after I made my mark, everything should be completed. So I'm done measuring my mannequin head, and these are results from measuring my mannequin head.